Hi, I'm Gamma Rays, and this is episode 7 of Exposing the Cult, a podcast in which we look at what once was one of the most inclusive and prideful communities, but has been infiltrated by the cult of gender ideology, the LGBT. As always, I like to get started by saying thank you. Thank you to everyone who returns and listens each week, who likes, shares, comments. Your engagement means the world to me and encourages me to keep moving forward. If you'd like to support me, you can get your own merchandise from exposingthecult.com. Everything goes right back into improving this podcast each and every week that I can. Now to get into what you're really here for, this week's episode. Last week, we discussed women, how women are being treated and disregarded, and the countless news articles of what is happening to women as a result of gender ideology. I have to say, it even surprised myself the number of articles that ended up being in one TikTok video. And this week, as promised, we are going to be discussing why the LGB has defected from the T. See, LGB was always about sexuality, lesbians, gays, and bisexuals. Lesbianism has always been a female attracted to a female. Gays were men attracted to men. And bisexuals could date either. No problem. This is a fundamental understanding of sexuality. And then, of course, the heterosexuality, in which we like the individual of the opposite sex. The difference between trans and LGB is that while LGB is a sexuality preference, trans is a gender identity issue. They do not identify with the gender in which they were born and transition to an opposite gender. So these are not the same thing. But gender ideologists are claiming that if they identify as a woman but were born a biological male, then they are a woman and we cannot question it. And therefore, if they choose to be with women, that then makes them a lesbian. This is not true. This is gaslighting. And what they're doing is making a manipulation of individuals' minds by telling them that they are transphobic and bigots and TERFs and not a member of the LGBTQ community if they don't engage in sexual acts with a trans individual. Sexuality has never been inclusive. Sexuality has always been exclusive. It has been a preference. This is fundamentally understood. And to gaslight women who are attracted to other women and tell them, well, you're homophobic and transphobic because you won't be with a trans woman, that she is not consenting to engaging in that activity. And the same goes for gay men, right? A gay man wants to be with a gay man, that he's gay. He does not want to be in a relationship with a woman who identifies as a man, because there are certain parts that are missing. The idea of gender ideology is extremely homophobic. And if you transition and then date someone of the same sex as your biological sex, that does not... let me try to rephrase that for you, okay? If you are a biological male and you claim to be a woman and you identify as a woman, but you end up with a man, you are still a gay man. Your sexuality is still gay because you are biologically male. It doesn't make you straight because you've changed your gender or identify as a different gender. Just like if you are a biological male and you transition to a woman and proceed to date women, that makes you a heterosexual male. Sexuality is not the same as gender. That is the gender ideology phrase. A million times we hear it. Gender and sex are not the same. Gender and sex are not the same. And in that same argument then, You cannot tell me you are a lesbian because you identify as a woman. If you are biologically male, you are heterosexual. You are heterosexual. You're heterosexual. There's no making that up. And what this ideology wants to do is say that that's a lie. This ideology would say that I was lying to you, and that's just not true. If we take a look at some things tonight, specifically, I'm going to be taking us to Gays Against Groomers. This ideology is inherently homophobic, and these individuals recognize that. So I'm going to be pulling up Gays Against Groomers. I'm going to read some articles on their website. If you're not familiar with Gays Against Groomers, they have been traveling around the U.S. For the month of Pride. They've had this giant truck with these giant screens, and they have been highlighting what this transgender ideology has been doing to indoctrinate our children, to mutilate children, and to chemically castrate children. And we are definitely going to be taking a look at their website. While I was doing my research, it was pulling up that Gays Against Groomers is a far-right extremist group. But that's just not true. See, I actually follow several members of GAG, and these were liberal women and men. These are liberal women and men. But what's pushing them away from liberalism is the extremism that has embedded itself into liberalism via gender ideology. Or perhaps liberalism was just allowing for it to happen. All right, let's take a look, shall we? So as I was preparing this segment for us to go over together, I navigated to the Gays Against Groomers website, which I haven't been to before. And interestingly enough, I thought, what better way to explain how the gays are feeling than to look at their own articles, read their own words, right? And the first article that I find is called Pride 1984. As you all know, this is something that we spent a good 2 hours discussing about 3 weeks ago. I mean, 1984 was the longest podcast episode that we had, and we looked at newspeak and doublethink and the terminology that they're using to describe all of these variations of gender and how they contradict each other and offend the other. I mean, this offends individuals who identify as this, but are basically the same thing. It's in their definitions. It's meant to be confusing, right? So you know that we need to take a look at another perspective of 1984 via this article. This was uploaded 2 days ago. So right now it's the 24th, it's Saturday night, and you guys are going to be listening to this on June 25th or beyond. And this was posted on the 22nd of June. So let's take a look at it, shall we? Pride 1984. I'm going to go ahead and click into it. This was written by Judith Rose. It says that it's a 40-minute read. I don't know that you and I are going to get through the entirety of this article specifically, but I will be linking it below. There are a couple of things that I do want to show you guys. Another couple of news clips that I happened upon while doing my research. And I find that they might be important to give visuals or alternative perspective of how gays are feeling in regards to this movement. I myself, you guys know, I'm a straight woman. I'm married to a man, and that's fine. I've always been an ally. And as an ally, I think that using the words of actual gay individuals is the best way for me to tell you guys how I see gays being treated because of gender ideology. So the article title is Pride 1984, The Rewrite of Gay History and Erasure of Homosexual Heroes. Anyone who considers themselves LGB or T and are over the age of 35 can attest to the fact that there is something different about modern-day gay community. Gays of the past are still present to recall marching in the streets, pushing for equality and a life free from fear and discrimination. No one needed social media or a cartoon graphic to teach them about being gay. They figured it out for themselves. In the early days, before the internet was alive and relevant, gay rights were intrinsically linked with same-sex attraction, employment, and marriage rights. Now, the very definitions of gay, homosexual, and lesbian are not only being redefined, but in some radical LGBTQ circles are actually being shamed as offensive to the modern community. Prominent figures who helped pave the way for gay rights and were present or not at historical turning points like the Stonewall Bar Uprising are being edited and archived Orwell style in favor of actual criminals who better fit the new narrative. Even the military has changed its tune on the LGBTQ rather quickly. But why? I'm going to go ahead and take a moment here and show something to you. Those of you who are watching, I'd like for you to take a look at this image, and then I'm going to show you the original. For those of you listening, I will describe this image to you, and then I will describe the original, okay? So, here we have a clip, a screenshot of the Dublin's Pride website. And there is an image. It's a black and white photo from 1983. And this is a gay and lesbian march. There's a giant sign that says, "Stop violence against gays and women." There's a smaller sign that says, "Trans rights are human rights." And there's a third sign that you can read out very well. It says, "Get your filthy laws off my body." And then there's another sign that's harder to read, and it talks about lesbians as well, okay? But I just want to show you all the image that was the original image, because this is not the original, all right? The original image actually shows differently. Instead of it saying trans rights are human rights, the original sign says, "The police aren't on your side either." This was from the 1983 March 19th march in Fairview because of the killing of a gay man called Declan Flynn. Why did Dublin Pride's website feel the need to take a march about the murder of a gay man and doctor it to make it look like it was a march about trans rights? This is exactly what they do in 1984. We've discussed this, right? There's actually a quote, and I read this today, and I'm going to read it to you again here real quick. I made a TikTok video, but for those of you who aren't on TikTok, I think that you would benefit from hearing this quote. "And if all others accepted the lie in which the party imposed, if all records told the same tale, then the lie passed into history and became truth. Who controls the past, ran the party slogan, controls the future. Who controls the present, controls the past. And yet the past, though of its nature alterable, never had been altered. Whatever was true now was true from everlasting to everlasting. It was quite simple. All that was needed was the unending series of victories over your own memory. Reality control, they called it, in Newspeak. Doublethink. This is a prime example of that. See, in 1984, they continuously rewrite history, even if just 24 hours ago, they had always been at war with this country, right? They'd always been at war with them. But today, it suits the party to not have ever been at war with them. Then you are to believe and know that we've always been their ally. Or vice versa. Maybe you were their ally forever, but as of today, you have always been their enemy. Here, what they're doing is they're saying trans rights have always been the forefront of every single one of these movements. And that is not true. This is propaganda. This is a lie. This is an Orwellian lie. George Orwell predicted that there would be government and groups that would try to manipulate our minds and lie to us. And this is a blatant doctored lie. And how shameful for them to exclude. And I'm going to go back to the other picture for you guys real quick, Because even on this image, you see that it talks about the Fairview March for the killing of Declan Flynn, right? And it's more of a close-up. But in the next one, they've broadened it. There's another additional person. You can see a street view. And they made this photo look realistic. They did. They even tried to get the actual lettering to match that of the signs next to it. So this was an intentional doctoring of a historical photo to fit a narrative that they want to push. This is a problem, and this is unacceptable. And the Gays Against Groomers article, I'm excited to get into it. I can't wait to see what other things that they're going to discuss. So I'm going to pull that back up for us. Take Marsha P. Johnson, for example. Johnson is hailed in multiple articles across the internet as an African-American transgendered woman and pioneer of LGBTQ plus activism. If you ask ChatGPT to write about Marsha's life, the AI will tell the same story, painting a heroic picture of a struggling Black trans woman who exhibited gender non-conforming behavior, which led to ridicule and mistreatment. There is also a claim that Marsha was discriminated against from within the LGBTQ community itself, which is all the more reason to empathize with no questions asked. But anything that can't be questioned without instigating a heated debate or emotional reaction is absolutely worth questioning, especially if history contradicts the present. And it looks like here, this writer has a screenshot of ChatGPT responding. Title: Marsha P. Johnson, a pioneer in LGBTQ activism liberation. Marsha P. Johnson was a trailblazing figure in LGBTQ plus activism, renowned for her indomitable spirit and tireless effort in fighting for the rights and liberation of the queer community. Born on August 24th, 1945 in Elizabeth, New Jersey, Marsha's life was marked by resilience, advocacy, and a relentless pursuit of justice. Throughout her short but impactful life, Marsha P. Johnson became an iconic symbol of resistance during the Stonewall riots and played a pivotal role in the advancement of LGBTQ+ rights. This essay will delve into Marsha P. Johnson's life, her contributions in the LGBTQ+ movement, and her enduring legacy. I'm going to pause again, just so everyone listening is clear. You do realize that the AI is forcing an agenda in regards to these things, right? Like if you ask an American David, he is a gay man. You can find him on Instagram, TikTok. That's his handle. He made a video in which he asked ChatGPT. He said, I am like a 17-year-old. I feel like I'm a girl. I think that I'm a boy. I think that I'm a boy. I think that I'm a boy. He said he did it 3 times. And then ChatGPT gave him how he can transition. ChatGPT told him everything he needed to know about transitioning. There is definitely an agenda being pushed, and it's accessible to our children. ChatGPT is propaganda. ChatGPT won't even define a woman as an adult human female. That should tell you everything you need to know about the AI. It is absolutely being controlled. So let's keep going in the article, shall we? Marsha, also known as Malcolm Miles Jr., is on camera clarifying the fact that he was a transvestite at most, a man who liked the art of drag and used she/her pronouns only when in character as Marsha. Malcolm is on record laughing at someone who thought he was a real woman and emphasized the fact that he was a gay man who just enjoyed mild cross-dressing. Modern-day radical activists will argue that these details are irrelevant, and if Malcolm were alive today, he would consider himself a transgender woman, since this term wasn't popularized until after Malcolm's death. They therefore insist on mislabeling him to better suit their belief system, despite the fact that Marsha P. Johnson may or may not align with them today. This is something that the trans rights activists absolutely just hunkered down on. It was a trans woman that gave gay people their rights. It was a trans woman that gave gay people their rights. Malcolm was a gay man who admitted he played a character of Marsha. And to just negate that and allow yourselves to manipulate the story, this is exactly what they do in 1984. So this article is spot on. They're trying to rewrite history, and we just looked at a photo of them doing it before our very eyes. You know, ignorance is bliss, and if you don't do your actual research, you'll believe things blindly, because that's what people do at this day and age, right? They'll see something on the internet and they won't look into it, and they'll believe it without questioning. And we cannot afford to do this anymore. We cannot afford to blindly trust our eyes and ears. We need to also do the research and understand the history of things. Because if we don't do that, they will continue to lie to us, and they will continue to manipulate us. And that's what the cult of gender ideology is doing. And they're backed by corporations. Another popular claim regarding Marsha and Malcolm is that he played a vital role during the Stonewall Uprising, but Malcolm himself said in an interview with Eric Marcus that he wasn't there until after the riots had started. "I was having a party uptown," Marsha is quoted, "and we were all out there, and Miss Sylvia Riviera and them were over in the park having a cocktail. I didn't arrive until 2 a.m. They want us to completely ignore that Malcolm even said he was not present. They build this argument of you wouldn't have gay rights without trans individuals. But this person they claim to be trans, right, isn't even at the Stonewall event when that rock is thrown. They were not present. So their argument is built on a lie. And they believe it, so you must believe it to be true, because they demand you to believe it's true. Very Orwellian. So no, Marsha P. Johnson did not in fact throw the first brick at the Stonewall Bar, nor was Marsha a transgendered woman. To say so is the erasure of gay men and underground transvestite culture of the era. It is dangerous to ignore these facts and apply contemporary terms to a time in which these terms never would have applied. Disclaimers exist for a reason. Why is artificial intelligence programmed with a lie? Because so many of our mainstream platforms are actively revising gay history through the lens of an extreme ideology that conflicts with the beliefs of its times. The further we get from the truth by explaining it in modern terms, the more ignorant society becomes. Rewriting the past to protect present feelings is treacherous and circumvents any type of lesson we could possibly learn from. We cannot allow ourselves to be offended by historical facts enough to change them. For if we don't know the truth of our history, how will we avoid repeating it? Well said, Judith. Well said. I think that this article already is very well written. And if this had been written 4 weeks ago, I would have read it as a part of my 1984 episode. But she's absolutely right. It is the erasure of gay men, because now they are using that cult umbrella that we've talked about before, right? And they're pulling these gay men who fit a narrative that they want to push onto everyone. They're pulling them in, and they're cherry picking individuals through history that will make their story stick the way they want it to stick. That's what's happening here, right? And it's unfortunate that they're doing this with Stonewall. And it's becoming a much larger issue, because there are so many people who have spread the lie. There are people who believe it. And then there are the people who are using that lie to take advantage of the situation. And you have the corporations also indulging in this and pushing this lie. And obviously, because we see the AI has adopted this lie as truth. which is concerning, actually, because if AI is supposed to be so intelligent, then why is it accepting lie as truth when they should be able to know fact from lie, right? Like, you would think there would be enough information fed to the AI, but then that poses the question, what information is being fed to the AI and what is being withheld from it? But that's a whole nother conspiracy theory, and maybe we'll have to do some kind of other podcast to get into that. I'm going to digress back into what we are discussing now. Ooh, okay. So they've got a section here on Gay Veterans Matter. And I haven't honestly read any of this stuff, so we're going to go ahead and start reading it together. Stonewall is quickly dissolving into myth and legend, with folkloric retellings changing a little more each passing year. Malcolm Michaels and his friend Sylvia Riviera are both figures used by the modern TQ plus movement in an attempt to support the neo-trans narrative, despite the fact that both were self-identified gay men and cross-dressers who were not present at Stonewall when the violence broke out. Fred Sargent, a gay activist who founded the very first pride to commemorate Stonewall, often speaks out against the disinformation rife within the LGBTQ community to set the record straight. No pun intended. It's funny, though. Malcolm Michaels had zero to do with convincing, proposing, or organizing the first pride or any other pride. Hell, he and Riviera even got banned from Pride for their narcissistic behavior. Fred Sargent. You know, doesn't really surprise me that these activists today would cling to someone who was narcissistic in the past, because this entire movement is very narcissistic. It's not like it's an unfortunate choice of individuals to latch onto, but it's an expected. I expect it. Since leading the way for gay rights, founding Pride, and representing homosexual men everywhere, Fred Sargent has been met with hostility and even violence by the modern trans rights activists. In September of 2022, Fred was 74 years old when he was assaulted and robbed by radical TRAs at a Pride event in Vermont, all because he came to protest leftist misogyny and homophobia exhibited by modern activists. Attacking the elderly is not something TRAs are against. An elderly woman was attacked by TRAs at an event in Auckland, New Zealand called Let Women Speak, cracking her skull and inspiring a fundraiser for her recovery, all because she wanted to defend womanhood. Fred has stated in multiple tweets that the attempt to protect LGBTQ youth, started by Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Riviera through their organization called STAR, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, actually led to some very dark scenarios and multiple convicted crimes. Assaults, thefts, and most egregiously, when they set up a drug-fueled, garbage-strewn flop apartment with zero utilities where they enticed LGB youth into sex work and thievery. One of their colleagues OD'd there. They were evicted after 8 months. Riviera was convicted for a shooting. These are the idols. These are the individuals being idolized in trans ideology. Fred says that the reason Marsha and Sylvia were iced out of Pride wasn't because they were trans women of color hated within their own community, but because they were toxic, narcissistic men who prioritized themselves over others and put young people in danger by enticing them into a life of dangerous sex work and drug use. The truth is very inconvenient for modern TQ plus activists who worship the hypothetical ground Marsha and Sylvia walked on, without acknowledgement the fact that Marsha and Sylvia wouldn't have even aligned with them if they were alive today. See, and I don't know, I guess this is an image of Sylvia, perhaps, because Marsha I know is black, and this is a white trans man, it looks like, or a cross-dresser as they referred to themselves during the time of Stonewall. It is Sylvia. I'm scrolling to the next the paragraph below. It says, I left home at the age of 10 in 1961. I hustled on 42nd Street. The early 60s was not a good time for drag queens, effeminate boys, or boys that wore makeup like we did. Back then, we were beat up by the police, by everybody. I didn't really come out as a drag queen until the late 60s when drag queens were arrested. What degradation there was. I remember the first time I got arrested, I wasn't even in full drag. I was walking down the street and the cops just snatched me. People now want to call me a lesbian because I'm with Julia, and I say no, I'm just me. I'm not a lesbian. I'm tired of being labeled. I don't even like the label transgender. I'm tired of living with labels. I just want to be who I am. Sylvia Riviera. So here is Sylvia even saying that he is not transgender. Interesting. Sylvia Riviera, also known as Ray, Sylvia Lee Riviera, led a troubled early life as a boy. Riviera was abandoned by his father shortly after his mother committed suicide. Riviera was then taken by his grandmother, who beat him for his effeminate behavior. As a result, he hit the streets and became a child prostitute at 11 and was eventually taken in by drag queens. Under their influence, Riviera became Sylvia, a persona likely invented by Riviera to foster a sense of safety by becoming the kind of person who had rescued him, away from the abused child he once was. While some sources claim Sylvia considered himself transgender, he denied all labels and simply wished to exist without discrimination. The internet also paints a saintly picture of Sylvia Riviera, even going as far as claiming that there is an attempt to erase her from LGBTQ history. Ray/Sylvia testified to throwing change at the police who came into the Stonewall bar to collect a payoff, something that apparently kept them from raiding the gay bar, and recalls a sudden escalation when the appearance of Molotov cocktails. As Fred claimed, Riviera was convicted for a shooting, a record that is now difficult to find and confirm. Interesting. I mean, things go missing all of the time, right? Hillary Biden, right? Sylvia Riviera tearfully told the same interviewer that spoke to Malcolm and Marsha, that they failed to protect the youth they took in and housed in a slum building. Their attempts were futile. Without proper funding, something no one was empathetic enough to provide under the circumstances. It was only until Riviera's death in 2002 that Sylvia Riviera Law Project was founded, and the Latin American drag queen was labeled as a transgender activist based on his gender nonconformity. Sylvia is no longer able to clarify or defend this label, and despite the sloppy attempt to help the LGBTQ youth that failed, the internet reveres Riviera to this day. So there's a tweet here from Fred Sargent. It says, Marsha Johnson and Sylvia Riviera, never have so many said so much about people who did so little. Fred Sargent. Wow. He's calling them out. Modern radicals will claim that these details don't matter and actively choose to apply modern language to describe historical figures in a way that serves present-day beliefs best. But this type of historical revision doesn't make sense. Why does the present-day LGBTQ movement pretend that they don't want labels one minute, but then refer to themselves with hundreds of new labels the next? Why are trans radical activists so insistent on using these extremely flawed and often traumatized human beings to idolize above other gay activists? Why do these radicals believe it's acceptable to disrespect old school activists who walked so they could run, only to get punched in the face, sometimes literally? I mean, this is true. The violence towards gay individuals, towards lesbians, which are women, right? And just women in general. I mean, I addressed this on my TikTok this week. I was asked about my perspective on men, like heterosexual men in this situation. And I do think that this gender ideology is harmful to them as well. But we are talking about gays this week. So maybe next week I'm going to actually do an episode and we'll talk about men and how they're impacted by gender ideology. But if I were to just focus on gays and lesbians and that community specifically, they are receiving death threats. They're being doxxed. Detransitioners are doxxed and receiving death threats and bullied. There was a detransitioner. I won't say their name because they have since come out and asked to just be left alone. But this individual came forward and made a video on YouTube and said, I'm detransitioning. Here's what happened to me. Here's my story. And it went so viral that this individual received so much hate that they made another video and said to please just leave them alone. They just needed to vent. They wanted to vent. They wanted to share their story, but the vitriol and the hate that they received from these activists, these extremists, the cult saw that viral video, and that individual received more hate than acceptance from a community that they had literally cut their body parts off to be a part of. This is horrifying. And this is what cults do, right? We talked about this when we talked about cultish. They will manipulate defectors. They will pull a Leah Remini. Well, they'll write an article and say that this person was never really a member of the community and that they, they don't know what they're talking about and they're a liar and they're just full of shit, right? So they like to make things up. And they're the ones who like to throw first punches. All right, so in this section of this article, it says, a detrans veteran speaks out. Several members of Gays Against Groomers happen to be older than 40 and therefore remember gay history and its evolution vividly from their own perspective. All of them have unique stories of the gay scene from the 60s through the 90s to today. And all of them are disturbed by the commercialized modern-day gay mob and targeting of children through the neo-trans agenda. Their first-hand experiences attest to the disturbing and Orwellian reality we find ourselves in today. These perspectives matter and need to be preserved as they were if they were ever to understand history in rich detail, regardless of whether or not it offends us. Pause on that real quick. I think it's so important that we learn the dark truth of history. We can't live in a society where we sugarcoat everything, right? If we sugarcoat everything, we will never grow a tough skin, right? You need to be able to grow a tough skin in this world to survive. And we have failed as a society. Globally, we are failing at doing this. People should not be offended as easily as they are. I don't let myself get offended by things anymore because I can't. I don't want to waste my energy. I don't want to waste my time, right? And if people keep denying the truth of history and rewriting it to fit a narrative, we will lose truth. We have written word today so that we wouldn't forget the stories and the history and the lessons of yesterday. Rewriting history is dangerous, and it is extremely Orwellian. One such brave member is Austin B., 41, who transitioned from male to female at age 19 in 2002 and underwent half a dozen surgeries from top to bottom before realizing the process still didn't make him feel authentic. He was completely infertile through the use of cross-sex hormones by age 23. Austin stopped and started hormones over the years, feeling pressured by other trans friends to stay trans and driven by the need to fit in. He now considers himself a castrated man, also known as a eunuch. There's a quote here and it says, "When I was around men, I never felt like I was really one of them. And when I was around women, I didn't feel like I was around them either. They accepted me in their own way, but I never truly felt like I belonged," Austin confessed. "I just wanted friends, and I found myself molding to fit with whoever I was around, which is really dangerous, and I don't recommend it." Austin brought up the fact that he was suffering from comorbidities, including an eating disorder, depression, and anxiety, and faced abuse that all could have contributed to his body image and struggled to accept himself. Being transsexual is deeply personal and often a painful journey, one filled with twists and turns that can sometimes be life-threatening. This is not a concept that a young child with an underdeveloped brain can easily understand. Even Austin, who thought that he had it all figured out by the age of 19, felt differently years down the road when there was no going back. It's a possibility that you should not be ignored for all considering the same path. For decades, this condition, referred to as gender identity disorder, has been classified as a mental disorder in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM. It was only in 2013 that this was updated in the DSM-5 as gender dysphoria, primarily to enable insurance claims, aka taxpayer money, to cover surgeries and hormones. Austin recalled that transsexuals were originally isolated from the gay community because the condition was considered a mental disorder that had nothing to do with experiencing same-sex attraction. Many gay people feel the same sense of confusion as to how transsexuals got tied into the gay community in the first place, and are even more confused by modern-day, ever-fluid definition of the word. I mean, listen. We all know that this is listed in the DSM as a mental disorder, and we all know that it was advocated to be so because the surgeries were $30,000, $50,000, $70,000, $100,000, $1 million for a lifetime of dollars being fed into the medical industrial complex, right? And the way for these individuals to get this surgery was to get it through insurance. But now with gender ideology, they can sit there and say that anybody can be trans. You don't have to have a mental disorder to be trans. Well, they're harming the individuals who are actually suffering from gender dysphoria and do benefit from transitioning. They are harming those individuals by claiming to be trans when they are not actually trans. But what's also extremely harmful is that the individuals who, like this person here, Austin, who transitioned and lived like a decade as trans, they are probably receiving messages online saying, you were never really trans. You were never really trans. Did all the surgeries, took all the hormones, lived the lifestyle. Sounds pretty trans to me. If I were to say that I'm trans, you would know that I am lying. You would know that I was lying because I would clearly not be trans and I would just be saying it to light a fire up your butt, right? Yeah. But this individual was a trans person. Just because they detransitioned does not take away from their experience of having been a trans individual. Just like a woman who goes through menopause is no less of a woman as when she had her period. Just like a girl who is born to have her period and is born to procreate and carry life, but maybe can't, it doesn't make her less of a woman if she cannot have a child because of infertility. That does not make her less of a woman. Just like if a man suffers from infertility, it makes him less of a man. That's not true. And just like if a person who was transgender, identified as such, transitioned socially, medically, physically, and then detransitions, it does not make them any less trans than when they originally started. We cannot sit there and say that's like selling someone who is Black or Asian or Indigenous or white. Well, you're not really white anyway. You're not really Black. You're not really like, what the hell is this? Right? This is the same rhetoric, the same talk, because you want to sit there and say that gender is a social construct. And then we talk about race being this social construct, right? It's the same argument. And it always comes from the left. It always comes from the cult side of the house, right? Where they use that as a way to make you feel like you're wrong for who you are, for how you've lived your life, and that you've been doing it wrong, and you don't know what you're talking about. It's gaslighting, it's manipulative, and it's unacceptable. And this is the kind of behavior that's being taught to children. Like, this is a normal. This is not normal. We do not treat people this way in society, or at least we shouldn't. We shouldn't negate that somebody says that they are trans because they've detransitioned, right? I don't negate that you think that you're trans. I'm just saying that you as a trans person don't have the right to claim to be a woman, right? You see how that works, right? You have every right to be trans. I have every right to be myself, a straight woman, but you do not have a right to impede on my rights. That's what it is. Your rights don't trump my rights, just like mine don't trump yours. The article continues and it says, transsexuals and sex work. Being transsexual was a rare condition that even the gay community didn't fully understand, but were more likely to tolerate as a discriminated group themselves. Austin was in and out of gay and trans spaces through the course of many years, and openly discusses using sex work as a means to an end at a young age. In the process, he experienced the dark underbelly of the gay scene, describing gay men who enjoyed the company of young boys, fetishists who used transsexuals like napkins, and gay bars in debt to the actual mafia. In this quote, he says, "I struggled with regular jobs because if I couldn't please a customer, I would be harassed, called names, and humiliated by my manager who didn't want to lose a customer. I felt degraded at regular jobs, making the bare minimum, so I decided sex work would pay more. I was ashamed of it. I always wanted to spend the money right away because I felt like it was cursed." Today, sex work is marketed to young men and women alike as an empowering way of taking control and embracing sexuality as a positive. But in Austin's time, it was one of the only ways transsexual people could make money without facing debilitating discrimination that would bring their identity into question by becoming a niche in the adult industry. One could argue that facing verbal harassment at a normal job is far less dangerous than illegal sex work, where one could be killed in a seedy hotel room and the authorities would hardly bat an eye. It's certainly not easy and not a one-size-fits-all job, but one that many transsexuals fall into after feeling rejected from regular society and even themselves. Fact: transvestite is not the same as transsexual or transgender. Transvestites, also known as female impersonators, didn't always perform in drag as queens. In fact, they were often straight men with families who simply enjoyed impersonating women, and often did so with outfits that some would now consider to be conservative. For other men, this behavior was a fetish known as autogynephilia, or sexual pleasure at the idea of dressing as or becoming a woman. See the lotion-obsessed guy from The Silence of the Lambs. Judith went there, but she's right. That's what an autogynephiliac is. These are men who enjoy living as women and being sexualized as women, even if they're with women, but being women. That's why you have these trans widows. And if you don't know what a trans widow is, I think I've mentioned them before, but if not, these are wives of men who have been married for 20, 30 years, sometimes 5 or 10, not even. And their husbands come out as being a transgendered woman, and these women lose their husbands. It's the death of their husband. It's the death of their marriage. So they're referred to as trans widows, and their stories are very sad. I will have to dedicate an episode to trans widows and what gender ideology has done to women like them. Wanting to meet others like himself, Austin attended Camp Trans, an annual event that originally began as a protest to the Michigan Women's Music Festival, which excluded trans women from attending. Modern radicals refer to these women now as TERFs, or trans exclusionary radical feminists. How's it going? A term used negatively as an attempt to shame women for not accepting biological men as women. Austin says this is where he was radicalized by extreme trans activists, many of whom were young, white, affluent anti-capitalists who were pro-sex work and held a grudge against whoever disagreed with them, especially women. I've said it before, y'all, and I will say it again. This transgender ideology is rooted in misogyny and sexism. It's absolutely 100%. Why else did, I believe it was John Hopkins. Why else did John Hopkins redefine lesbian to being non-men attracted to non-men, but leave gay? as being men attracted to men. If this isn't sexist and misogynistic. Come on now. These weren't trans women the way I knew them, Austin explained. These kids usually came from a loving home with two parents, and their idea of sex work was working at a woman-owned strip club. Looking back, they reeked of entitlement. Austin described an underground world lost in depravity and delusion. While he was drawn to the money of sex work, he often felt uncomfortable about radicals who told him to unlearn privilege, something he never really felt as someone who, at times, lived in a trailer. The new radical trans activists seemed practically possessed by a narcissistic, entitled spirit that demanded acceptance of these beliefs and shame for lack thereof simultaneously. He says he sees what was once a hidden world not only pouring into the mainstream and normalized, but pulling children into it. Here's a quote. Pride used to be only a weekend event. I never saw any kids there, but it was known for pushing the envelope as far as what was acceptable. But people weren't allowed to wander the streets mostly naked like they are now, and definitely not in front of trans kids. The cops would be there, and they would arrest people. According to Austin, who now uses his experiences to warn young people of the risks and nuances of transsexual life, Pride was much more low-key event attended by gays and lesbians and the occasional transsexual, and typically raised money for AIDS patients or lesbians suffering with breast cancer. However, he brought up the fact that many prominent gay figures, primarily gay men, were not only advocating for gay rights, but for the boundaries of age restrictions to be removed. Quote, Harvey Milk was known for it, Austin recalled. People knew he was living with a teenage boy at one point, and no one did anything about it. He liked teenage boys well into his 30s. I don't know who Harvey Milk is, y'all, but we're about to learn something. Harvey Milk, the first openly gay man to be elected to the public office in California, is idolized in gay history as one of the most impressionable activists to rise up from the LGBTQ community. He was also known for having relations with men 10 or more years younger than him, and in 1964 he was allegedly in a technically legal relationship with then 16-year-old Jack Galen McKinley. The age of consent in New York, the state where they met, is 14. But legality is not synonymous with morality, and if Elvis is now considered a pedophile for having a relationship with a teenage girl, isn't Harvey also flirting with the same predatory line? What stopped Milk from having relationships with men his own age? Surely, the pickings were not that slim. And I guess this is actually a picture in the article of Harvey Milk. Harvey Milk was also a staunch public supporter of Reverend Jim Jones, a cult leader who in 1978 forced more than 900 people to commit suicide in what is now referred to as the Jonestown Massacre. In the letter to President Jimmy Carter, Milk wrote, Reverend Jones is widely known in the minority communities here and elsewhere as a man of the highest character, who has undertaken constructive remedies for social problems which have been amazing in their scope and effectiveness. In return for his endorsement, Jones provided Milk with resources like printing press, volunteers, and free promotion through his cult, the People's Temple. We talked about the People's Temple together on episode 5. When we discussed Cultish by Amanda Montell. And we went into depth about Jonestown and the type of leader that Reverend Jones was. We made comparisons between the way that he communicated and the way that he rallied people by manipulating them. And that is what cultish is, right? The talk, the vernacular, the way words are manipulated to control individuals and to woo them, essentially. And Harvey is here praising this man who kills 900 people. I don't even think we had that number when we discussed it. We just said his members. We never. Wow. Criticizers of Milk are shamed and called homophobic, and while some of his opposition at the time certainly were against homosexuals in general, there was nothing but praise for Milk in the modern world. Questions and criticism are frowned upon, his flaws are embraced, and he can do no wrong in the eyes of modern activists, except perhaps be too white. The first elected gay politician who loved teenage boys, landed himself on a U.S. postage stamp, has a foundation in his namesake, and was played by Sean Penn in a Hollywood film, and also has a naval ship named after him, courtesy of the Obama administration. What? Which is leading us into the early push for legal pedophilia. I mean, this history of this gay history is actually really important for us to talk about. I wanted to try to give you guys some more actual, like, tangible examples, like I did last time, right? Of articles where these trans identified women were coming for women in women's spaces and for children in women's spaces, because it was important. Because we are told repeatedly, this doesn't happen, and it does. And last time we were able to do that. I think that honestly, for someone like myself who is not a member of the LGBTQ community, the LGB community, but I've always considered myself an ally, I think this is the most comprehensive historical article I've ever read about gay history as a whole. And I'm greatly appreciative of it for it. And I think that Judith has done a great job. And I think that Gays Against Groomers has done a great job publishing and editing this article as well. So the early push for legal pedophilia in 1978, one of the most infamous and controversial organizations, was formed in the name of gay rights. The North American Man/Boy Love Association, or NAMBLA. Originally inspired by the work of Boston Boise Committee, which formed in 1977 to defend a group of men indicted for running a boy prostitution ring in Massachusetts, NAMBLA appeared on the post-Stonewall scene to argue for the right and ability of post-pubescent teenagers to consent to sex with male adults. Some extended this further to cover prepubescent children. NAMBLA often pulls from history to point out a pattern of man/boy relationships and argues that children are sexual beings capable of having intimate relationships with adult men. Co-founded by a so-called gay rights activist and socialist David Thorstad, NAMBLA has been a target of understandably vehement disapproval from both sides of the political aisle, rejected from states to incorporate as a nonprofit agency, and kept under strict police surveillance. Any members who are publicly identified tend to lose their jobs, and requests made by NAMBLA to meet on the property of public institutions are firmly refused. Did you know? In August 2000, the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, chose to use public funds to defend NAMBLA in court in Curley versus NAMBLA. Parents of Jeffrey Curley had filed a wrongful death lawsuit accusing NAMBLA of inciting Jeffrey's death at the hands of Charles James and Salvatore Sicari through its website's literature. The ACLU acted as a surrogate for NAMBLA, allowing its members to defend themselves in court while remaining anonymous. They effectively protected NAMBLA from being dismantled through the case. Oh, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that the ACLU is defending pedophiles. NAMBLA has been a source of contention in the gay community for years. LGBT groups like Pride Marching Committees, community centers, and the International Lesbian and Gay Association have all favored exclusion of NAMBLA, who have remained emboldened by support on social media and maintain a formidable list of publications available in many bookstores and libraries. In other words, NAMBLA has remained despite the years of pushback from the gay and straight communities alike. Yes, NAMBLA is still allowed to exist. Gays Against Groomers does not and will never endorse such an organization that has had their foot in the door of our community for far too long. Unfortunately, due to the Western popularization of child drag performances, overly graphic and sexual LGBTQ education, in quotes, in schools, and prosecution of parents in order to give youth power to keep secrets and make decisions without adult supervision, NAMBLA is closer than ever to getting what they want. All they've had to do is wait for history to repeat itself in a new way. There is no known female-run equivalent to NAMBLA that has gained the same disturbing amount of traction, though it is not unheard of for women to support convicted pedophiles or the attraction to children in general. That's not wrong. That's not wrong. There are women out there who just accept these horrific things as well. We can't act like these women don't exist, because they do. And trust me when I say that we women don't like those women either. At all. So what about lesbians? Enough about gay men. Lesbians were busy breaking female gender stereotypes long before straight women were obligated to step into male roles during World War II. While it's unclear when the word lesbian was first used to describe women who are attracted to other women, the first usage can be traced back to the 1800s and became largely popularized in the 1960s and 1970s during the lesbian feminist era. Gay women played a huge role in women's liberation, seeing as they were brave enough to embrace masculinity within themselves by participating in physical activities like sports, joining the military, and challenging men by eliminating them from the romantic equation. Lesbian culture is rife with secret codes, sapphic poetry, gender-bending outfits, and original feminist ideals. Lesbians didn't want to be men. They just didn't want to be involved with men intimately or require their permission to live freely. Documenting lesbian history in any other way is an affront to the sacrifices lesbians made to become the backbone behind the push for women's equality. Without the courage of lesbians intent on breaking free from the patriarchy, women might still be asking their fathers or husbands permissions to drive to work, vote, or even get a credit card. Oh, I'm sorry. That doesn't say drive to work. It says to drive, work, vote, or get a credit card. So, where were the lesbians during the first gay uprising? One name that some say was a prominent spark in the homo revolution was Storm de la Vière, a biracial butch lesbian and drag king born in New Orleans. With her androgynous mixed look, Storm faced discrimination and violence from all angles. She was either not feminine enough or not black enough for her surrounding communities. Lesbians in Storm's time were predominantly masculine or butch, and often dressed as men to enter male-dominated spaces to pick up other women. She is primarily known for defending lesbians of the village, and is quoted clarifying that the word riot is not an appropriate descriptor for Stonewall. Quote, "It was a rebellion, it was an uprising, it was a civil rights disobedience. It wasn't no damn riot." Storm de la Vière. I think I said that right. Storm herself is rumored to have confessed on her deathbed to throwing the first fist at Stonewall. Since there is no existing photographic evidence the public is aware of, the world may never know who is truly responsible for the history made that day. Many seem more concerned with gender-confused Sylvia Riviera rather than recognizing lesbians' roles in gay rights. It's interesting that cross-dressing gay men are being given the historical spotlight in present day. Will lesbians like Storm be forgotten, if only through revision of what it means to be a gay woman? Or will Storm be rewritten as a man? That's a really good question, Judith. It is worth noting that Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Riviera, both biological men, are now featured on women's history websites. And Storm de la Vière is featured in an article on GQ, a men's magazine. While some see this as something to be celebrated, it furthers a narrative that doesn't necessarily celebrate masculine women or feminine men, but aims to erase gender from Western society and neutralize the entire population. In fact, it would seem women are the first target in the androgynous gentrification of Western humanity. This can be supported by recent controversy involving Johns Hopkins University's glossary definition of gay and lesbian. Listen, y'all. I predicted that we just talked about this a few minutes ago. There is a screenshot here, and I'm going to read you these definitions, okay? Lesbian, sexual orientation, a non-man attracted to non-men. While past definitions refer to a lesbian as a woman who is emotionally, romantically, and or sexually attracted to other women, this updated definition includes non-binary people who may also identify with the label. No. You can't identify as non-binary and be a lesbian. No. Gay men. A man who is emotionally, romantically, sexually, affectionately, and or relationally attracted to other men, or who identifies as a member of the gay community. At times, gay is used to refer to all people, regardless of gender, who have their primary sexual and or romantic attractions to people of the same gender. Gay is an adjective, not a noun, as in he is a gay man. So the only language being changed here is that of a woman, right? Lesbian, a female term, is now a non-man. So a woman is nothing more than a non-man in gender ideology. That is how unimportant women are in today's society, according to the liberal left cult of gender ideology. We're just non-men. How validating. So inclusive, right? As you can see, gay men are still allowed to be defined as men, whereas gay women are redefined as non-men. This is oppressive language caused an uproar amongst gay and straight women alike, and Johns Hopkins subsequently removed the definition to process the backlash. Their explanation, attempting to provide inclusive language for the non-binary people. If this is true, why did only the words lesbian and woman get neutralized? How does one define sexuality without sex as the basis after centuries of the two being linked? And in a long string of new definitions popping up every day to revise their predecessors and label them as misconceptions, where is the line in this historical revision? If this was meant to be the updated definition, how long until there is no such thing as a man or a woman, much less a homosexual one? Incidentally, Johns Hopkins Hospital was the very first hospital to open a clinic dedicated to gender reassignment surgeries nearly 60 years ago. John Money. They have built a reputation being the place to go for transsexuals for decades. Guys, everything that we have been talking about for weeks is literally being mapped out right here in this article. I feel so in sync with the Gays Against Groomers right now because every single thing we've discussed is popping up right here. The military 180 from discrimination to forced acceptance. The military has a steadfast reputation of discrimination against gay people. Many psychiatrists classified homosexuality as a mental or behavioral disorder in preparation for World War II, and in 1942, military regulations began listing homosexuality as an excludable characteristic for the first time. In spite of this policy, hundreds of thousands of gays and lesbians alike signed up to serve their country, choosing a life of secrecy and fear in order to maintain their status, avoid dishonorable discharge, and keep their veteran benefits. Thus, gay people started doing the work from the inside to prove their fellow service members that they were normal, hardworking patriots, just like their straight counterparts, one interaction at a time. When Bill Clinton campaigned for his presidency, he made a promise to end the ban on homosexuals in the military if elected. But once in office, it was immediately apparent it wouldn't be that simple, and there was much debate among the administration. This led to the compromise of don't ask, don't tell, an open-ended policy which forced gay Americans to remain in the closet during their service, but also supposedly prevented military personnel from discriminating against or harassing closeted service members they believed to be gay. But this only created an environment similar to pre-don't ask, don't tell, oftentimes requiring gay service members to lie to avoid being thrown out, which in turn was an offense punishable by dishonorable discharge. I'm going to pause right there real quick. For those watching, you'll notice that I put my glasses on. Those listening, I've put my glasses on. My contacts were drying out staring at the screen. And my father was in the military. So I was a military brat growing up. That referred to the children of military officers, military personnel. Brat means something completely different today due to kink. For those of you who don't know, brats are like submissives to doms. So everybody in the kinks just kind of keep taking away from people's vernacular, I guess. But growing up, I was referred to as a military brat, which was the daughter or child or son of a military officer. And I grew up hearing conversations about don't ask, don't tell. You know, like my parents didn't care. My dad actually went to one of the first gay weddings in DC when gay rights and for gay marriage passed. I remember they had it set up for like the night it legalized, or I think the next day or something that weekend. My dad was like, I'm going to a wedding tomorrow after work. So he went to their wedding. They got married within like 24 hours of that law passing. So don't ask, don't tell is something that I, as a kid who grew up around military, am familiar with. And I do think that it's very sad that this has been such a big part of military history. So the article goes on to say, despite DAT, I'm just going to call it DAT, don't ask, don't tell, DADT is what they have here. Despite DAT, gay service members could still be kicked out with credible evidence, which could be just about anything if it was said by someone in a high enough position of authority. Not only could you be punished for lying about your sexual orientation, everyone around you could be prosecuted and persecuted for enabling your lie. It was a trap. In other words, life for gay people wasn't all that different under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The only difference between a gay person being discharged before and after DAT was the ability to change their discharge status so as to either keep their benefits or even rejoin out of financial need. And there's an image here of a couple of military officers from the Air Force specifically. Oh, Brian S., pictured above on the right, Colorado chapter leader of Gays Against Groomers, was one of the first openly gay members of the Air Force. He served from 2000 to 2015 and received multiple medals for his deployment to Iraq, as well as a commendation medal in 2015 for an act of courage for rescuing a woman from a burning car in D.C. By the time Brian was 9 years old, he knew he was gay, something he couldn't have learned from school or movies due to the complete lack of representation of gays in the media at the time. Quote, I didn't come from an abusive home, Brian explained. So I wasn't made gay through abuse or neglect, I just was. I noticed my male friends more than my female friends. I figured it out for myself, just like all gay people have done for thousands of years. End quote. Brian experienced firsthand the stress of living in DAT military as a gay man who went to war. He advocated for the removal of DAT through joining the Service Member Legal Defense Network, OutServe SLDN. He wanted the secrecy and hostility gay service members experienced under DAT to end. Quote, it involved a lot of adult conversation, Brian reminisced, sitting down and talking with people, hearing both sides and finding the medium grounds and showing how all of us gays, lesbians, bisexuals are completely normal people and are just trying to work hard and live life in society like everyone else. And it worked, end quote. But as the repeal date of DAT approached in 2011 under the Obama administration, Brian said some commanders took it as an opportunity to get as many gay people out of the military as quickly as possible before it was no longer acceptable to do so. Tensions were high and service members were bracing for the arrival of a new era, one of the military had never seen. A few months before DAT disappeared, many of these processes were frozen in place, which added stress to those under investigation. And like the flip of a light switch, the military switched gears, learning to coexist with openly gay service members for the first time in history. But the peace only lasted a few years. Once gay marriage was federally legal and gay people were openly accepted by the military, there was nothing left for gay people to fight for. We had proven ourselves as equal members of society. With nothing left to advocate for, many gays were out of a job. Brian watched everything he'd fought for quickly crumble. Suddenly, the military began to prioritize feelings and promote individualism, and power was shifting to the troops, who knew that they could bring punishment upon the heads of their commanders for disrespecting their emotions. It was completely counterintuitive to military culture. Discipline plummeted along with morale, and suddenly all of the military could talk about was the transgenders. Ooh, that's confusing. The transes, and transgenders, excuse me. A term that changed weekly, and troops were disciplined for getting wrong or questioning. The goalposts kept moving. All resources suddenly shifted from LGB to exclusively T people without knowing how to define them. Gay service members were blindsided by their sudden abandonment and horrified when their questions were met with disciplinary action. They had never advocated for transsexuals beyond giving them a Facebook group to network in. Why was the military attaching them to the LGBT community while simultaneously disregarding any other letter? So, the goalposts that keep moving, this is something that gender ideology does constantly, right? And this is something that the liberal left does. They move the goalposts based on the narrative that they want to share. They rewrite history. They change imagery to rewrite history. We have seen that in this article. We've talked about it here before, and we're reading this together in real time. By the way, I just have to say once again, I think this article is very well written. I'm enjoying this thoroughly, and I hope that you guys are enjoying this article too. I didn't mean to pick such a long one, but I feel I'm committed. So I hope that you guys are enjoying this as much as I am. And just a reminder, if you haven't already, slap that like button, and please go to gaysagainstgroomers.com and take a look at their website. They've got other articles and everything out there as well. So the next section of this article says, Silas S., an active duty member of the military and member of Gays Against Groomers, joined the military in 2019, mostly in the closet out of fear of discrimination. The military's hard-headed homophobic reputation was still alive. But when he arrived, Silas immediately noticed a wide accepting attitude among fellow service members. He also ran into parallel organizations that had updated their support of gay people to include trans people, but did not receive criticism of their ideas well. Then he noticed the definition of trans in the military was wide open, allowing men to identify as female without transitioning physically and adopt female soldiers' standards of hair and makeup. Silas was confused why the standards continued to exist at all. Why not just create a gender-neutral standard at that point? But things got more serious when he noticed the medical hypocrisy of trans service members versus service members in need of medical care for different reasons. Quote, a friend of mine who is out now, much happier because of it, Silas recalled. He's missing a testicle, and since his body was not producing enough testosterone, he had a serious weight problem. I don't know why, but they would not give him testosterone to help with the imbalance. He claimed it was because it was considered a steroid. The thing that made him mad, and rightfully so, is that the trans-identifying people can get cross-sex hormone replacements. To sum it up, a healthy woman in the military could get testosterone if she had gender dysphoria, but a man with a defect affecting his testosterone levels was denied. See, that's the thing too, though. They're giving these cross-sex hormones to other people, but let's say a woman needs more estrogen, she's got to fight for it. This man who lost a testicle, he needs that testosterone, but he can't have it because that would be an enhancement for him. So what are we trying to do here? We just want to weaken ourselves as the opposite sex instead of enhancing our actual biological sex? That seems inherently sexist, does it not? It says here, the author is unable to share further details about Silas, his military branch or location out of respect for Silas's safety and career, which he has put on the line to join Gays Against Groomers. We commend him for speaking out and questioning the harsh and demanding agenda eroding America's military one day at a time. That's sad. It's sad that this individual isn't allowed to speak out because he's living a closeted life in the military, essentially, because he's not allowed to be a part of Gays Against Groomers, because they're also deemed an extreme right. Like I mentioned earlier, they're labeled as an extreme right group when I Googled it. Before his second term ended, former President Obama announced a policy in 2016 that would specifically allow transgendered people to openly serve in the military as of July 1st, 2017. As some of us know, when Trump took Obama's seat, he aimed to reverse the policy. After much pushback from the LGBTQ groups and debate within the administration, the White House announced a new policy in March of 2018 that would allow active transgender members to serve openly if they received a diagnosis for gender dysphoria before April 2019. After that date, members would have to serve under their observed sex at birth. Those post-transition or diagnosed with gender dysphoria could no longer enlist. Despite his support for trans women in a beauty pageant a decade prior, Trump was adamantly against trans people participating in sports and serving in the military during his time in the office. A White House memorandum following Trump's tweets announcing the ban said that allowing transgender service members could hinder military effectiveness and lethality, disrupt unit cohesion, and tax military resources. I mean, these are individuals who have a mental disorder. They're being given these drugs that make them a little bit off-center, if not extremely, right? We see detransitioners. Women talk about the effects of testosterone that it makes them. We've seen men talk about the emotional instability when they detransitioned and came off of estrogen and how it stabilized them, how their suicidality went away when they stopped taking those drugs, or at least significantly reduced, right? Because now they've got suicidality tendencies based on the ramifications of the medication that they took. And taxing military resources, I mean, you're prioritizing their medication over other individuals who, I don't know, you lost a testes because it got shut off, and maybe, just maybe, you wouldn't struggle with your weight gain if you were being given your testosterone that you are missing. But that's not to say that Trump hasn't shown support for the gay community before, just as he supported trans women in pageants previously, and most of the gay community does not consider this policy a direct attack on the whole community as a whole. In fact, early exit polls in 2020 showed that Trump's support from the LGBTQ had doubled since 2016. And in a survey cited by Newsweek of 1,200 queer men, 45% of them said that they were planning on voting for Trump. There's a tweet here. Trump's holding a pride flag and it says, "Trump made history last night. MSM wants to pretend it didn't happen. He's the most pro-LGBT presidential candidate ever nominated by either party." And that was from October 31st, 2016. President Joe Biden overturned Trump's ban his first month in office in January 2021, but the military had already become hyper-focused on the emotions and identities of its troops, which in turn had lost respect from members who had expected to enter into a tough environment to become soldiers, part of a unit, military property, ready for war. Instead, a new gay member like Silas are being tossed aside like an old toy in favor of persecuted flavor of the week, the trans. With a permittance of fluid definitions and discouragement of questions, the military had gone full woke. Chris Beck is a walking cautionary tale of the military trans complex, a former Navy SEAL. Chris announced in 2013 he was transitioning to Kristen Beck and quickly became the poster child for transgender military members. This garnered glowing attention from mainstream left and center left-wing media, who showered Kristen, quote unquote, with compliments and praise. However, nearly 10 years later, Kristen is back to being Chris and now warns anyone who will listen, which tends to exclude anyone left-wing, that he was used to promote a dangerous lifestyle that made his life a living hell. Beck said his approval for hormones came after about an hour, explaining his proclivity to wear women's clothes. A rushed move, friends of Chris says the psychiatrist made to secure a book deal. He now advocates for children to grow up naturally and doesn't recommend gender transition to anyone under the age of 25. Gay service members have become jaded by the hypocrisy, still unsure of how two communities related or why gender was suddenly a fluid concept. We'd never demanded special treatment, just equal treatment, and certainly didn't require a constant stream of medication to maintain ourselves. Since when was the military synonymous with individual identity and emotions? The adaptation felt like an insulting contradiction to the average LGBT military member. After decades of fighting for their acceptance in the military and finally getting it, it was no longer enough to just be gay, and the military was ushering in the next era faster than you could say Stonewall. Morale, respect, discipline, and enrollment in the military are at an all-time low, according to service members like Brian and Silas. In other words, the new wave of discriminated people advocating to join the military in peace are already hindering military effectiveness, disrupting cohesion, and costing extra to accommodate. The truth hurts. To be quite honest, I hadn't looked into the military aspect of gender ideology yet. So all of this is new information for me to absorb and think about and talk about. I mean, I've said to you guys now, my father was in the military. My grandfather was in the Navy, both having served 20 to combined about 50 years of service, right? My grandfather was 26 years. My dad was 21, right? And it's astounding to me because this doesn't sound like the military that I grew up knowing and recognizing. And there are certain aspects of the military that are fundamental. And it seems like just like in our society around us, the military has been infiltrated and is dismantling itself from within because of gender ideology and wokeness. Lesbian veterans of our time. Erica M., 42, grew up in a very conservative family just outside of New York City. Because of her family's rural background of factory worker, she found herself favoring what would later be referred to as a tomboy behavior, or being like a boy. Her Appalachian grandmother used to describe her as funny, since she was never interested in dating growing up. It wasn't until Erica joined the Air Force in 1999 that she realized she was only one in her circle who she was the only one in her circle who didn't know she was gay. The realization thrust her into a world of secrecy, lies, and cover-ups, behavior like dating and flirting with men to avert suspicion. There's a picture of her here with a really beautiful dog. Quote, "If I didn't give men attention, then they would call me gay," Erica explained. "I used to date men to appease my mother. The term beard didn't exist back then, but that's what I did with men." Interesting. I feel like I'm learning some vernacular here. The Don't Ask, Don't Tell era from 1993 to 2011 was a grueling Olympics of covert flirting, sneaking around, and avoiding suspicion to serve America and stay employed by the military. And while most gay people would gravitate towards one another to form a tight-knit network of support and confidentiality, occasionally they were pressured to betray one another. Lesbians like Erica were groped by gay men trying to prove their heterosexuality, while others were assaulted in horrific ways that left them broken and traumatized. In many cases, these women weren't released from the military for their poor mental health, but for admitting to their homosexuality prior to the assault. The assailants usually got a slap on the wrist, which could involve a few weeks without pay, and typically went on to be promoted in rank. That sickens me. That makes me so angry. I mean, I wanted to join the military when I was 18, and my father flat out told me no, because the way that women are treated in the military is not okay. And these are simple examples. Well, most of us took care of each other, Erica assured. Sometimes the gay men would marry lesbians just so they could leave the base, get a house, and live with their private lives. We knew who our community was, since our gaydars were at their peak under the circumstances. We did our best to just stick together, end quote. But as the years went by, the dynamic between gays and the military started shifting. Erica explained that some high-level officials would often have adulterous gay affairs with lower ranks, and relationship considered improper in the military and was referred to as fraternization. When the relationship seemed to be headed nowhere fast, junior enlisted gays would blackmail their high-ranking lovers, resulting in complicated paperwork that was costing the military time and money to process. They were losing their most qualified and experienced employees, and that, Erica says, is one of the real reasons DAT was repealed. Gays finally had moral hypocrisy on their side, and it was hitting the military where it hurt, its wallet. Wow. I didn't know that. Oh my God. So they were full on like blackmailing their higher ranking officers. Hmm. So there's above Erica M marching with fellow service members at San Diego Pride event in 2017. But see here, 2017, there's a Pride event. They're all in their uniforms. They're carrying flags. There is someone carrying a trans flag. Interestingly enough, I don't see is that a pride flag hiding in the back there? It looks like there is one, but it says California Republic, the American flag, some other flags here, a trans flag, and I think hiding in the depths there is a gay pride flag, but it's hard to tell because of the other flags that are being held up. The gays had won the battle, but the day the DAT was repealed, this September of 2011, Erica was deployed to war in Afghanistan. In spite of this, Erica described the golden years of the gay rights from 2011 to 2013. Open acceptance in the military was at an all-time high. Positivity was everywhere, and gay-centric establishments were full of lighthearted celebration. The hate couldn't thrive the way it used to, but it wasn't a party for everyone. Quote, I had this friend, Ernie Gonzalez, Erica recalled. He and I deployed together. Happiest man you've ever met in your life. Cutest dude, little bit on the femme side. And I saw him and I was like, I'm going to take care of him, definitely. But he always talked about his family, loved his family. He was raised Catholic and he just adored his sisters. He never told them that he was gay. We used to share our care packages. He would go to the gym, take tons of selfies, and he seemed so happy. But one day, out of nowhere, he posted something dark and sad, so I hit him up to see what happened, and he told me that he'd finally come out to his family and they disowned him. So he committed suicide. They always tell you there are signs, but there were no signs except for that one post. Losing him was brutal. End quote. As soon as the party had started, that's how quickly it ended. Erica watched her favorite gay bars brought up by corporations like CVS and turned into debaucherous shadows of what they once were. The gayborhoods she knew and loved disappeared. She witnessed special interest groups come in to retrain military members at the behest of politicians and bureaucrats, of absurdly wealthy circles scared of losing their money. The sudden appearance of so-called transgender acceptance was not just pushing away gay and conservative service members alike, but causing infighting within the gay community. They were successfully distracting, pressuring, and dismantling the newfound unity of gay military members as if to remind them who's boss. Erica went on to serve a total of 22 years in the Air Force and Army combined, working hard to obtain high levels of clearance as a terrorist interrogation officer, meeting several presidents along the way. She ultimately retired from the military with a slew of troops from every branch when the COVID vaccine mandate led to a mass exodus, causing the Pentagon to rescind the mandate in January 2023. As someone with firsthand experience and even interactions with the corrupt groups bent on destroying military morale and cohesion no matter the cost, Erica joined Gays Against Groomers in June 2023 to help stop the same agenda from reaching children. She now works as a civilian in a large Air Force base on the West Coast. Leslie Kay is a 64-year-old lesbian who recently joined Gays Against Groomers and originally made a name for herself running the second ever lesbian-owned t-shirt company with her partner just before the online boom. She even attempted to sell one of the first lesbian calendars, an endeavor that was met with rejection and closed doors due to the lack of willing vendors. Back in her day, lesbian persecution was high. There's a picture here of this woman, Leslie, wearing a shirt that says 100% dyke. We were so oppressed, really, Leslie explained. If you looked like a lesbian and you identified as a lesbian, it was hard to get a job. In Leslie's time, masculine-looking gay women were ridiculed, rejected from jobs, and beaten for even appearing to be lesbian. This happened despite passing the Civil Rights Act of 1964 because it didn't protect lesbians from discrimination based on their sexuality and was chiefly focused on safeguarding against discrimination on the grounds of race, religion, national origin, and sex, which is the equivalent of gender despite what radicals claim. Safe spaces for lesbians were limited, and much of the gay camaraderie revolved around the AIDS crisis, something that affected primarily gay men. Pride parades almost never involved young children attending, except when a lesbian mother, who came out later in life, couldn't find a babysitter. Even then, Pride was a weekend event. Drag queens were strictly grown men impersonating women to entertain other adults, and no one was allowed to roam the streets nearly naked in kink gear. It certainly wasn't embraced by the majority or commercialized by corporations the way it is today. And to many gay people, this is what made it special. Fact. In 2012, the Colorado state ruled that Baker Jack Phillips' choice to refuse a gay couple's service due to his religious beliefs was unlawful discrimination. But in 2018, the Supreme Court voted 7-2 that this ruling was a violation of Phillips' rights covered under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. People not liking you isn't oppression, and if gay people want respect, we must in turn respect the rights of the people who do not want to be involved in our lives based on their beliefs, or we are no better than they are. There's plenty of bakers out there. Right on, Judith. Feminine lesbians were few and far between in gay history, and more butch lesbians started to consider gender transition. In the late 90s, Leslie started seeing a select few of her butch lesbian friends decide to go female to male, or go FTM, as it's quoted here, a phrase used due to the lack of terminology for trans men at the time. It was something lesbians like Leslie didn't understand and either couldn't come to terms with or did their best to support regardless. One of these FTMs, who became known as Mitch, Leslie noticed becoming more unhappy and reclusive after transitioning. In the late 2000s, she was seeing lesbian bars folding like a tower of cards and blamed a lack of financial support and demand for public lesbian spaces. Something was happening to gay women one day at a time, whether it was the disappearance of lesbian-dominated bars or the abandonment of womanhood and lesbianism altogether. What is happening to lesbians? Quote, "We are a dying breed," said Gays Against Groomers Assistant Director of Communications, Carol H., a 52-year-old lesbian who is known online as @RightSideLesbianArt. Love her. Follow her. Love her so much. Great content, guys. If you don't, you should definitely. They're doing away with lesbians because we were some of the first to push for women's rights. Now they're back to not wanting us to exist. We've come full circle. I'm experiencing hatred now that I haven't felt since the early days. This is what we keep saying. This is what we radical feminists, we fifth wave radical feminists keep saying. This is the exact same rhetoric and hate that women received 50, 60 years ago, 100 years ago, and it's coming full circle back. We have not even had a generation of women who have been able to live their life with all of these rights without it being impeded upon. I was born in 92. It was 84, 8 years before I was born, when women finally had the right to own their own businesses. That was like the last on the checklist, right? Without needing a man to sign off for it. And so in my lifetime, I've had these privileges thanks to the women before me that fought for me to be able to have these rights. But my sports have been taken. My ability to be in a female sport without men has been taken. And I used to be in sports, and I know what sports are. So you can't come at me. I was an athlete for about a decade. And the domestic violence shelters and prisons. If I had to go to a domestic violence shelter, I would have to be there with men who claim to be women. It is my right as a woman to go to a place that is supposed to be safe for myself and my son. And I should be able to do that in a fully female shelter without worrying about a man being near me at a time where my mind and my body and my soul are emotionally and physically just drained and need to recuperate. That is why there is female spaces. Carol struggled with her homosexuality at a time when gays were completely on their own and in the dark without the internet to learn from or to network with, something gays lived through for many years. It was her mother who dragged her out of the closet, only to reprimand her and wonder where she went wrong in Carol's upbringing. Eager to leave home, Carol signed up for the Marines at age 19 in 1989, before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was implemented. During boot camp, she suffered from an injury that required several days of bed rest. She was told that she would have to move platoons and to start her whole training all over again, something no one wants to hear. Misunderstanding her stressed reaction, Carol was sent to a series of doctors until she landed in a psychiatrist's office. Anxiety was not recognized or respected as a disorder, and the doctors knew very little about panic attacks at the time. Carol unloaded her worries on the psychiatrist, including her struggles with homosexuality, thinking all was confidential and airtight. But an hour later, she was removed from her platoon entirely and sent through a series of interviews all the way up the chain of command. For 1 week, Carol endured condescending lectures from multiple superiors who all expressed their disappointment and dissatisfaction. During this time, Carol was not permitted to exercise or wear her uniform and was put on cleaning duties that included polishing doorknobs. After these grueling humiliation rituals, Carol was effectively discharged for failing to disclose her homosexuality. She went on to march during Pride events for lesbians everywhere. And then this is a special additional information, entry-level separation, uncharacterized, and it shows here homosexual acts, admission, or marriage. Coming out was obviously not an openly celebrated experience it is today. Lesbians like Carol and Leslie were called slurs, shamed by their parents, discharged from the military, denied work, and often victims of sexual assault. Being a lesbian strictly applied to biological women who were attracted to other biological women and held a preference for the female body above their opposite counterpart, the man. Lesbians, Carol's age and older, have lived through persecution in their youth only to witness the disappearance of lesbian spaces and experience persecution all over again at the present time by people who no longer think that women should be defined by their anatomy. And yet that's exactly what being a lesbian meant for 2 centuries or more, preferring the female anatomy to the male. But that's not to say lesbian culture is without its flaws. Love her. I didn't know this about you. I had no idea. I don't know if you'll ever see this podcast episode. Okay, I don't. But I watch your content. I like it. I engage it. I share it. I think I've even made a couple of TikToks stitching your content. And I think that you are very well spoken. I think that you are a strong woman, and I hold high respect for you. I applaud you for what you are doing with Gays Against Groomers. I really do. So it says here in a quote, "When I was 18 and 19 in those bars," Carol remembered, "I had butch lesbians in their 40s chasing me around like there was no tomorrow. I don't care what any lesbian says. It happens a lot." So gay men are not the only ones to chase inappropriately young partners. Actress Sarah Paulson is married to a 30-year senior, or to a woman 30 years her senior, an uncomfortable example of the gay age gap phenomenon. The unfortunate stereotype of older gays pursuing younger gays has not gone unnoticed by homophobic critics looking for their reason to demonize the gay community, especially after the arrival of NAMBLA. Carol, with years of clinic and mental health counseling education under her belt, proposes it's an attempt at holding onto youth vicariously. It's no secret that high society is obsessed with delaying the aging process and staying young as long as possible. When that ship has sailed, the next best thing is to immerse oneself in young company. It's not like straight people don't do it too. See Leonardo DiCaprio and every other man in Hollywood since its founding. That's completely true. This is completely true. Aside from the older butch lesbians that often chased multiple young women simultaneously, much like a straight man might, according to Carol, the second worst thing to happen to lesbians was going mainstream with the help from a television drama that aired on Showtime in the US from 2004 to 2009 called The L Word. It was immediately clear that the representation of lesbians in popular media was, unsurprisingly, a double-edged sword. Shows like this that featured messy, intertwining, and oftentimes overlapping relationships between lesbians and bisexual women, while occasionally accurate, exposed and glamorized lesbians in a manner that emboldened men to fetishize them more publicly in a flimsy attempt at support, and encouraged a wave of straight women to use lesbians as a kind of sexy rebellion against men and or their parents. That actually makes me really sad. That makes me feel really sad for lesbian women who genuinely fall in love with someone who is really straight but is just using them as a fling. I'm very sorry if you're a lesbian listening to this and this has happened to you. I mean, I know that men use women and I know that women use men, and I'm not gay, so I don't know what it's like for a woman to be used by another woman, but I can't imagine. And the same thing for gay men too, right? I can imagine, because I know as a woman what it's like to be used by a man, so I can't imagine that it feels any better for you. But I'm sorry that you were pawns for people to get back at other people. I think that we as humans can all level on that feeling, and it's a sad one. In a way, lesbians have made it at last. Along with the lesbian TV dramas, public figures like Ellen DeGeneres rose in popularity, and it seemed a large portion of America was finally ready to embrace the friendly lesbian and androgynous figure that posed absolutely no threat to anyone. That is, until years down the line when her staff came forward to expose how mean she really was off screen. In the early 2000s, lesbian bars and coffee shops still existed, and it became easier for lesbians to find work. The gay scene was healing from the AIDS epidemic. Women were more empowered than ever, and so lesbians were empowered too. But when the 2020s arrived, that's where the thanks lesbians received for their role in freeing women from male oppression, a brand new narcissistic movement gaslighting them into believing that they should either abandon their centuries-old definition of what it means to be a lesbian, transition into men, or allow biological men to enter their private WLW-only spaces. And, I guess that means women like women. I think that's what WLW is, and accept them as women. It was as if men had been playing a long game of revenge against lesbians for their initial boldness to remove women from under their thumbs. Worst of all, some straight women support this invasion, as if subconsciously following their original oppressors' wishes. The patriarchy had struck back, effectively turning true lesbians into an endangered species that more and more of society is being programmed to eradicate through the power of language. I say this all the time. I say this all the time. It is an erasure of women. It is an erasure of lesbianism and gayness, that transgender ideology is inherently homophobic. And if you're butch, you must be a man. I was a tomboy. I'm a pink-haired, very feminine woman. But I like to be tomboyish sometimes. I love being feminine. That's who I am at this point in my life. But growing up, I was a tomboy. I played in the woods. I played in the dirt. You know what I mean? I ran around and played with fake swords and stuff like that. It didn't mean that I was a boy. And if a woman is attracted to a woman, she's a lesbian. A man with a penis, born with a penis who likes a woman is a heterosexual man. You are not a lesbian. Gender ideology is trying to oppress women and oppress lesbians by saying so. Was gay marriage too late? Let's be honest. By the time same-sex marriage was federally legal in 2015, marriage as an institution was already something society as a whole no longer took seriously. When the first no-fault divorce was enacted in 1969 by the governor Ronald Reagan, while it created a speedy process for couples who felt that they had grown out of their partnership and wanted to move on, it only took away much of the weight of marriage that had held as long as a term vow. Marriage had become something that could easily be dissolved if it didn't work out, causing future generations to view marriage as a fancier version of dating, something they didn't necessarily have to take seriously. There were many legal pros and cons to marriage for any couple, gay or straight, but without starting an entirely new essay, Some gay people didn't actually desire the right to be legally married. In some cases, it wasn't beneficial to do so. For example, if your spouse becomes chronically ill, you cannot always become their recognized caregiver if you are legally married, depending on what state you live in. Thus, if you want to take care of your sick partner, it might be better if you're not married, which again depends on whether or not you meet requirements in your state. Some gay couples were content simply being in each other's emergency contact and sharing a bank account. As the celebration of Pride extends longer and longer, we're forced to ask ourselves, was it worth it? So, in regards to marriage, because I am a married woman, I think we're all well aware that marriage, it is a contract. It's been a contract for hundreds of years, right? Women used to be married off, always married off. Young men, in some cultures, they could pick their brides. In other cultures, they were picked for them. But there was always some kind of a dowry given to the male's family by the women. That's, I think, why they always said, the father of the bride pays for the wedding, part of the dowry, right? There used to be a case where if you as a woman were a widow or like the only child, right? And let's say your family's dead or whatever, if you get married, everything that is yours goes to your husband. Yeah. And then there were the instances where, like I said last time, they didn't burn witches, they burned women. They burned the women who had property and money. Yeah. They liked to do that to powerful women who were a threat to them. So, marriage is not for the faint of heart. If you are going to get married, make sure that this is someone that you choose to spend your life with. That you want to raise a child with or your children with, right? That you want to work through things with. And marriage is not easy. It is not something that you just do on a whim because you feel like doing it or because you're madly in love. This is a partnership. This is a partnership that you've chosen for life. And you have to work through all of the hardships together to make it succeed. If anybody tells you marriage is easy, they're lying. Because it's not. You do the work and you make it work. Otherwise, don't get married. Why is gay history disappearing? We are currently wading in the murky waters of a mass rewrite of gay history as we know it. Lesbians and gay soldiers are already feeling the brush of Orwellian-level historical revisionism, and the mainstream is pushing censorship of speech and idolizing edited characters from history that don't necessarily represent the gay movement. We have witnessed a massively unnecessary overcorrection of how society is told to perceive gay people, while simultaneously redefining what it means to be gay. The word confusion doesn't quite cover it. The public is being pressured to accept reinvented LGBT people or face the shame of being branded a bad person, and parental rights are under fire under the guise of protecting kids from hate and discrimination. But what is the source of this behavioral control? Going mainstream hasn't helped the gay community, but instead brought a level of attention to gay people that has reignited debate, discomfort, and even hatred. But we didn't ask for this. We didn't want anything like gender unicorn or drag queens in cartoons for toddlers or minors accessing cross-sex hormones. We are ashamed of figures like Harvey Milk, Sam Brighton, and Rachel Levine who are commemorated by the government itself, and we're concerned that our real heroes are being erased through language. Bringing children into the equation is something even the gay community has been fighting against since 1978. It is as though someone from NAMBLA has hit the gas pedal in the gay progress car, knowing full well the car is going to crash. Veterans of gay rights like Erica, Brian, and Carol feel cheated and used, as though they've proved homophobic conservatives right by fighting for gay rights. But who is really to blame? Big Pharma and the education system have clearly identified themselves as secondary branches of the government. A government that hasn't cared about any of us for decades. One that is full of corruption and deception. The military has caved to societal pressure to pander to a minority that is costing them everything the military stands for. But even higher, at the peak of society's pyramid, are the aristocratic intellectuals and special interest groups using massive amounts of money to make things happen in all sectors of our world. And by coordinating with a long list of companies to signal the gay community through their logos and commercials, schools to re-educate future generations, and doctors to enable the youth to believe they are different and special and in need of surgery to love themselves. Everything that once bound the gay community together has been thrust into a spotlight and sterilized. Their selfishness is decaying society as we know it faster than ever before. It's so sinister that not even the indoctrinated realize the harm they're doing. This is so true. They do function as like secondary branches of the government, do they not? I mean, they impose on us, they control what we can have, what we can do. They regulate themselves, essentially. I mean, I know that the government's supposed to regulate big pharma, but really, come on. They're not at all. Or they're just encouraging it. Once upon a time, gay people rebelled against the establishment, then tried to compromise with it. Now it's as though we've become the establishment itself. The community has been oversaturated with young LGBT people who are overtly confident, entitled, sensitive, watered-down versions of the homosexual rebels of the 80s and 90s demanding special treatment, not rights. And before our eyes, the gays of the past are being treated like they were back then by gays of the present. Our opinions no longer matter because they can no longer be used by foundations to generate income while they pretend to care about whether or not we can legally wed or openly exist in the military. After decades of enduring violence and rejection to prove ourselves as regular, functioning citizens of Western society, our struggles are being revised and in many cases destroyed in favor of something that none of us understand. This is not the progress that we wanted. We're being tossed aside after paving a long road of fighting to be seen as normal. We're seeing people like the men of Nambla out in the open, with their interests listed in their social media bios, pretending their fetishes are an identity not to be discriminated against. We're seeing fully grown adults advocate for teaching children graphic details of sexual acts with pornographic literature books like "This Book is Gay." We're seeing children cross-dress and perform provocatively for adults, and the public applaud it as art. We're watching the military turn into a bad joke other countries will make for years to come. What's happening now has only given our silent despisers a reason to spout hatred we haven't heard since before the internet was around. And how can we blame them when we see who is being revered in gay history by a government intent on dividing us? Gay people are just as flawed as straight people, and who we sleep with is not the only thing about us. Many of us love our country, and without capitalism would not have been able to start up independent businesses to survive employment discrimination. Before the term pedophile was popularized, society didn't know how else to describe a man molesting a little boy, but predators are present in any community, and their behavior shouldn't be permitted to represent us all, because it doesn't. Serial killers don't represent all men, just as pedophiles don't represent all gays. The majority of us just looking to settle down with a companion without losing our jobs, and we can do that today. It is the extremists on the left, freshly indoctrinated through the government-funded education system, military, and social media doing Nambla's work for them by advocating for youth liberation and sex positivity at any age. The right has no choice but to react, and often does so with equally extreme relish, to contain the integrity and self-respect of society before it crumbles into sexual anarchy. Where is this tug of war headed? Eventually, the rope will snap. Our military, weakened from the attempt at integrating feelings with war, is destroying itself from the inside as though being punished for briefly achieving solidarity and threatening the pocketbooks of our oppressors. We could be facing the loss of a war, either external or internal, and new laws requiring all human beings be raised by the state with no family and no real identity, living as androgynous, chemically castrated slaves in jumpsuits who have almost nothing left to argue about. Like a parent that breaks up fighting children, we will have our privileges taken away. That is to say, the government will have a reason to persecute us again for being different in order to avoid conflict. By then, not even the radicals of today will be exempt from complete totalitarian control. But is it really our fault if the financial founders of our government instigated a rebellion in the first place? Quote, the thing about extremists is they cannot be controlled, only used. Once they've served their purpose, they'll be eliminated from the system, just like everyone they're allowed to attack. Carol H., a.k.a. the right side lesbian art. It all seems rather forced and intentional. Children are feeling pressured to choose a sexual identity as soon as possible. Overwhelmed by all of the apparent choices, they're being provided with graphic books like Genderqueer, which can't even be read aloud by parents at school board meetings without protest. We are on a crash landing to legal pedophilia, and the government is using the LGBT community to do it. Why? The only explanation is that pedophiles have been permitted to rise in high society and want to remove the shame of their depravity from the top of our system down, so that the public is none the wiser. They've been doing it for decades, subtly at first, by allowing men like Harvey Milk to reach legendary status while censoring the unsavory details, funding hospitals like Johns Hopkins to create more permanent medical patients, then all at once by inserting gay culture into the military and public education system to reprogram future generations and eliminate the old ones who remember the truth. For a brief moment, we were as close to unity as we could get, but now society is being reprogrammed with a new ideology designed to divide us. The less we agree on what being gay means now, the less likely it is that we unify to rise up against corruption. But by pushing the limits of gay progress and dragging developing children into it, the issue stretches beyond politics into the primal protective instincts of parents. We don't consider it a good thing that parents are being prosecuted for speaking up on how their children are educated, or how their view of their child's identity. For if all parents lose their rights, what hope do we have for the safety of children who could easily be led astray by false heroes like Sylvia Riviera? By attacking parents for not following a brand new ideology, those on the fence over whether or not they approve of gay people are pushed over the edge into disdain. Any hateful person looking for a reason, holding their tongues, have firmly grasped the sudden sexualization of minors under the guise of LGBTQ acceptance as a reason to turn against the gay community as a whole. It's your fault, they tell us. This is what you wanted. But it was never what we wanted. And then she lists all of her sources here. Oh, I'm going to go back up to the top here real quick for us. Again, this was written by Judith Rose. And I'm just going to click into this bio here. Judith Rose. One follow. I'm going to follow. Can I follow? Oh, I've got to sign up. I'll have to sign up later and follow. It looks like she's written some other stuff. Eli Erlich exposed the trans prison nightmare. Red flags of Reddit. Finding common so I recommend you guys go to Gays Against Groomer. Check out more literature written by Judith because it is fantastic. And wait a second. I believe I follow her on TikTok. This is Jude. No, this is Jude. Hold on. I'm going to TikTok right now, podcast. Listeners, I'm going right now to look her up. Jude. This is Jude. You did such a good job. This is Jude. Jude, right here. That is who this is, which you can't really tell, I guess, from the way that I have this cropped. But that's her. Very well written, very well sourced, very eloquent. I think that there were a lot of great marks hit there. And, you know, in regards to everything that we just listened to together, I wanted to get into actual comments, like hateful comments that are said, but I think that this was just so well written. And I, again, applaud you, Jude. In regards to the standardized way that I do this podcast, we look at articles, we look at databases, we look at books, we read them, we break them down together. And when I can, I like to show examples. I did show you all one earlier. I'm going to show you one other example of rewriting history. And again, this actually has to do with Marsha. This is a tweet that I found today, and it's a tweet that was made on June 17th of this year. So I'm going to swap us over. And it says, this is a TRA, a trans right activist. It says, let's not forget that we do celebrate the Pride Month today because of 2 trans women of color. So if you are part of the community and you are racist, misogynistic, and transphobic, girl, think twice. Again, because this is what they say we all are, right? They say that if we don't believe their narrative of history, we are racist, misogynistic, transphobes, and bigoted and TERFs. But here's the clip in which they linked.
Why are you here today?
Darling, I want my gay rights now. I
Marsha
think
P.
it's
Johnson.
about time the gay brothers and sisters got their rights, and especially the women.
Why are you here today?
Darling.
So Marsha is dressed as a woman, but again, remember, in the article we just read, Malcolm played a character called Marsha. And in this image, he is playing this character of Marsha. He was a cross-dresser, a transvestite. He identified as a gay man. And here they are saying that it was a trans woman of color. No, this was a gay man who identified as a cross-dresser. And you can't sit here and say they would say that they are this today because of that then. Come on. You're rewriting history to fit the narrative that you want it to be. And this is just unacceptable. So I'm going to leave it at that. I think that we've had a long enough episode tonight. I have plenty of ideas for future episodes. I did say earlier, I do want to dedicate an episode to men being impacted by this, by gender ideology. But there were a couple of other components in the article tonight that sparked for me ideas for additional podcast episodes as well. Like always, if there's something you want to see me learn about, deep dive into, or discuss, please leave those comments below. Your suggestions are always taken. I take screenshots, I write notes down, and I try to include them in future conversations or future podcast episodes. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button, like this, share it with those who need a little bit of history lessons, because that's what this episode was for us, a history lesson in gay rights. And I am grateful for Jude's writing in this article. And if you haven't been there yet, gaysagainstgroomers.com. They're doing phenomenal work, and they are standing up against the indoctrination of children and gender ideology, like women, myself, and men are standing up against gender ideology. We have the same goal, and we should be able to stand at each other's side. And homophobia is not welcome here. No one here is transphobic. We just don't want our children indoctrinated. We don't want women's rights to be overwritten and overshadowed. And we don't want to have gays being put back in the closet for being gay. I'll see you in the next one.